I don't know what point that is going to feel real.
Reagan, you are my heart, and I will never find a friend like you. I love you, and until we meet again.
Reagan was not pursuing medicine for prestige or for money, rather to help others, and especially people of color and from low-income backgrounds.
Some crimes, although grisly, make sense. They come after years of red flags, toxic relationships, or a mental decline left unaddressed. Other crimes simply don't add up. When terrible things happen to good people, the world seems to stop for a second. What we thought we knew is gone. And for a moment, we feel unsafe. What happened to Reagan Chisley in June 2021 is indescribable. She had a whole life and a bright future ahead of her, and she had nothing but kindness to spread. And yet, she met a brutal, senseless ending at the hands of a teenage boy she thought she knew. This is the tragic story of the bright med student unalived by a troubled teen.
I walked across the street and looked down the street, and you could see one of the policemen doing CPR on the girl, and the ambulance came, put her in the ambulance, and had 2 police cars just flying behind them, getting her to the hospital.
It was Tuesday, June 22, 2021, when someone called 911 in a state of shock. A girl had just been attacked in front of a house in the Berkeley Drive area in Hampton, Virginia. When emergency services made it to the address, they thought the shooter was still inside, so they called for backup. It soon escalated into a horror show. A SWAT team, a dozen officers, paramedics, and scared bystanders were all crammed around one small house, expecting the worst. But it soon fizzled out, as the SWAT team realized the shooter had fled the scene before the officers even got there.
Last night, it turned into a barricade situation. The SWAT team surrounded a home for hours before realizing it was empty.
The bystanders watched as a young woman was taken into an ambulance on a stretcher, blood still oozing out of her. A few minutes later, she was pronounced dead at the Hampton Centara Careplex. A bullet had pierced her heart. That night, she was identified, and news of her death flooded TV screens across the country.
20-year-old Reagan Chisley died after she was shot off Berkeley Drive last week. Hampton police are still looking for the suspect tonight.
Imagine learning your daughter's life was taken from TV.
After the third homicide in the Hampton Roads city since the weekend.
That suspect, just 16 years old. They have his name and his picture, but they don't have him behind bars yet.
Before leaving the scene, officers spoke to witnesses. The ruckus before the shooting had attracted a few eyes that afternoon. Several people told the same story. Regan was with a friend, fighting with an older lady when a 16-year-old boy pulled out a firearm, aimed at Regan's chest, and fired. By the time anyone was able to phone 911, the teen and his mom fled their own home. Yep, the boy's mom was there, and she was happy to help her son escape, even after watching him do this. Regan fell to the ground, unconscious. She would lose her life in a matter of minutes, while her best friend watched helplessly. Immediately after the incident, the 16-year-old suspect was identified. His age did not protect his identity. He was a wanted fugitive, and people needed to know his name and face. This was Zaquan J. Tyler, the cousin of Regan's friend, 20-year-old Khadijah Newsome. As investigators delved into the case, they pieced together a senseless, heartbreaking story that shouldn't have ended this way. In 1969, the state of Virginia got a new slogan: Virginia is for lovers. This was the Woodstock year. The hippie movement was at an all-time high, and love was, well, a selling point. The phrase was considered bold and provocative, but it was also just plain smart from a marketing perspective. It planted a seed, a new image of a more exciting Virginia, with a generation that would become the most sought-after group of spenders ever to wield a credit card. However, Virginia kept its slogan to this day. Full of natural splendor and historical landmarks, Virginia still attracts its fair share of tourists and young families. Sadly, though, Virginia is also known for some pretty dangerous towns. One of them is Hampton. 1 in 338 people fall victim to a violent crime in their lifetime in Hampton, and 1 in 481 people suffer the same fate in Virginia.
By all accounts, we are facing a long, hot summer. We are seeing a surge in violent crime across Hampton Roads. It's teens and gangs and guns. The shootings are senseless and often random. Why is what everyone wants to know and no one seemingly can answer.
And when you read these stats, it's easy to think, sounds bad. But this can never happen to me or my loved ones. Of course, it's not wise to live in fear, and no one should live their lives always looking over their shoulder, expecting to fall victim to a monster. Sadly, every now and then, someone's loved one is taken away and becomes just another statistic. Reagan Charnay Chisley lived a full, happy life, free of worries and full of loving friends.
Studious, fashionable, and more importantly, a friend you could count on. That's how faculty, staff, and students described their classmate and fellow NCCU Eagle, Reagan Chisley.
Reagan was born on June 9, 2001, and from day one, she showed a crazy amount of positive energy. She was smart, well beyond her age, and was hardworking without anyone having to tell her so. She was only 3 years old when she decided she wanted to be an exceptional dancer. Her parents signed her up for ballet lessons, and she soon demonstrated huge talent. She was still 3 when she gave her first recital. This is pretty rare when it comes to ballet, which takes a lot of practice. Reagan did not stick to ballet as her life goal, but she continued to do everything with the greatest passion, patience, and diligence. Between 2010 and 2013, she was part of a dance competition team organized by the prestigious Evelyn School of Dance. Then, in 2013, Reagan began cheerleading. While she also put a lot of energy into it, Reagan knew she wanted to pursue a higher education. She was just 11 when she told all her friends she would be attending NCCU, or North Carolina Central University. And everyone supported her, just like she would them.
She was such a fun, caring person. She had the most unique kind of personality I've ever seen in my life.
Reagan wasn't the popular type in the sense that she was overly confident or rich, but she was always a good friend and put in a lot of effort to listen and help those who came to her. This made her popular in the most genuine way possible. She was also super fashionable, and that attracted a lot of eyes. So by the time she graduated from high school, Reagan had 2 major passions: fashion and medicine. Reagan graduated with honors, and she was ready for new chapters in her life.
Reagan Charnay Chisley Honors.
You have worked extremely hard to reach this milestone in your life. The administration, faculty, and staff are very proud of you.
Reagan's friends and family would often ask her for fashion tips and look up to her for her style. But more than anything, they looked up to her because she was mature, caring, and determined to help others. For her, studying medicine was a means to help as many people as possible.
I could tell that Reagan was not pursuing medicine for prestige or for money, rather to help others, and especially people of color and from low-income backgrounds.
And during her NCCU years, she made sure all her friends stayed focused on their goals and kept up the good habits.
Reagan didn't let me drop out, and I thank her for that. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be here right now.
Reagan's family never ceased to be amazed at how much energy she had. It was almost like there were more hours in a day to her. In 2021, she was a med school student, a cheerleader, a dancer, a basketball player, a track runner, a chemistry tutor, and a clothing designer. Meanwhile, she always took her time to sit down with friends and encourage them to never give up. And wait, that's not all. She'd even started a clothing line, aiming to pursue her love of fashion and take it one step further. If you asked Reagan how she did it all, she would tell you it's all being focused and organized. In 2021, Reagan lived in North Carolina, where she attended NCCU. But during the summer holidays, She would be back home with her family in Hampton, Virginia. She had a lot of loved ones, relatives and childhood friends that she cherished deeply, and she didn't want any distance between them. So in June 2021, Reagan celebrated her 20th birthday with family and friends. She seemed happier than ever, and she gushed over her friends also following their passions. A few weeks later, she would be dead. As soon as Reagan was pronounced dead, they started a huge manhunt for 16-year-old Zaquan Tyler.
After the third homicide in the Hampton Roads city since the weekend.
That suspect, just 16 years old. They have his name and his picture, but they don't have him behind bars yet.
Knowing Zaquan had fled the scene together with his mother, Lisa, investigators knew they had to look into her history too, and if she was involved in any way in taking Reagan's life. Detectives made their first big breakthrough when they spoke to the one person connecting Reagan to Zaquan, 20-year-old Khadijah Newsome. Khadijah was one of Reagan's all-time besties. They were the same age, had a lot in common, and spent a lot of time laughing together. Khadijah was also Zaquan's cousin, and y'all, their story was simply outrageous. Khadijah testified that Zaquan had stolen about $500 in cash and pot when they were living in the same house back in May of that year. The money, she said, included gifts from her high school graduation and tips from her restaurant job. She was not rich. $500 meant a lot to her. Khadijah was frustrated, to say the least. I worked hard for it. Zaquan was like a brother to me before this happened. On June 22nd, Khadijah asked Reagan to accompany her on a petty mission. They were going to visit Zaquan's home to get back everything he'd stolen from her. If they had to threaten him, so be it. He couldn't call himself their friend if he behaved this way. But when the two friends knocked on the door, Zaquan's mom, Lisa, opened the door. She already looked angry, even though the girls hadn't done anything to her. Khadijah explained that Lisa's son owed her some money, and they needed to talk to him. They knew he was home. Rather than calling her son to come outside and sort it out, or hey, invite the girls inside, Lisa straight up denied her son's theft and started cussing at Reagan and Khadijah. She called them names and cursed them for making false allegations against her precious son. Then, just like that, Zaquan emerged and pulled out a weapon. He pointed it at Reagan's chest and fired from just a few inches. Wait, what? What had Reagan ever done to Zaquan? She wasn't even the one demanding the money back. Also, who on earth solves a petty argument this way? Up until a few weeks back, Zaquan and Khadijah were good friends. What happened during those weeks to make him do this, to take Khadijah's best friend instead of paying up? Was his madness in the making? Did he have unresolved mental issues? And how much of this was fueled by his mother? You see, this is another sad thing the detectives unearthed. As it turns out, Lisa had prepared her son for a fight the night before, on June 21st. That evening, Khadijah texted Zaquan and Lisa to tell them she was coming over to retrieve the money and weed. Initially, Lisa said okay, and even asked how much Zaquan had taken. Khadijah would testify, she said she got me and she was gonna handle it. But then, Lisa changed her mind. She told Khadijah that her son hadn't stolen anything and that she would fight Khadijah if she turned up at her house. She texted her, I don't care about no consequences. Y'all, what is up with these people? 15 days after taking Reagan's life in front of his home, Zaquan was caught at a Newport News motel. The officers didn't find the weapon he used that day. However, they found a ton of ammo in his room. Was he getting ready for more violence? Indeed, Zaquan seemed to be intent on dodging authorities, but he did not seem remorseful or devastated by what he'd done. The detectives concluded that Zaquan, and perhaps even Lisa, had a lot of repressed anger toward Reagan to act this abruptly. It was a hugely disproportionate reaction toward a person who was simply accompanying her best friend to solve an issue. And why else would they target her, and not Khadijah? She was the one set on retrieving her stolen goods. Perhaps Zakwan wanted to punish his cousin for seeking what was hers. Apart from hate, there was no motive detectives saw in this heinous act. Zakwan's ammo was taken from the scene and sent to a lab for testing. The lab would confirm a match with the round that took Reagan's life. Zakwan was thus charged with first-degree murder. When he was handcuffed, taken to the station, and interrogated, Zakwan still did not show remorse, only frustration that he'd been caught. It's safe to wonder if he would have gone on to claim more lives in this state of mind. Zakwan's trial began when he was already 18 years old. However, he was a minor at the time of the incident, so that saved him from the toughest kinds of punishment. In the courtroom, Khadija testified that she was angry at Zakwan and set to have an argument with him about his stealing. She texted several friends the days before. She said in one text that I'm gonna go over there and steal all his stuff, telling another person she was on demon time and that the police might need to be called. However, Reagan was just a partner Khadija brought along that day, so why did Zakwan punish her the hardest? According to one theory given by the prosecution, Zakwan and Lisa's hatred toward Reagan came from her perceived perfection. Reagan was a smart, successful med student with a bright future ahead of her. She was going to make more money than them, she already had a fashion line, and she was pretty and popular. What they failed to see, however, is that everyone struggles on the inside. Everyone has problems, and just because someone is doing well on the outside doesn't mean their lives are perfect. Also, if someone is happy, be happy for them. There was another theory, though. Perhaps Zakwan had severe anger issues stemming from something that had nothing to do with Reagan. Perhaps he had mental issues not noticed or even ignored by his mother. Or maybe he'd been raised in a violent environment where this was seen as a solution to any problem. It's telling that Lisa prepared for a fight as soon as Khadija texted her the night before the incident. Maybe she riled Zakwan up, not the other way around. Perhaps Zakwan grew up in a house where disproportionate reactions were the norm. Clearly, Lisa was not shocked when her son pulled the trigger. She watched, then urged her son to flee the scene. Most mothers, I'd like to believe, would phone authorities. You can only protect your child up to a point, right? So depending on which theory you believe, Reagan was at the wrong place, at the wrong time, or she was targeted. Either way, she did not deserve any of this. It was a horrific end to a life defined by love, kindness, and ambition. Hampton Chief Deputy Commonwealth's attorney, Karen Rucker, and attorney Eden Holmes pushed for first-degree murder. As far as they were concerned, it was a premeditated attack. Even if Reagan was not targeted, Zakwan knew what he was going to do when he got the gun and walked out of his home to a fight that had just begun. Karen Rucker said he brought a gun to a fist fight, and he didn't have to kill her. Under Virginia law, she said, people can use no more force than reasonably necessary to defend another, and Zakwan had a million options, Eden Holmes said, including intervening in the altercation himself. Eden Holmes spoke to the jurors during Zakwan's 2023 trial. She never had a chance to live her dreams. She never had a chance to take another person under her wing. Imagine how heartbreaking it was for Reagan's family to sit there, listening to this, and reliving the horror. Meanwhile, Zakwan's defense attorneys painted another picture. Zakwan, according to them, was just a supportive teen intervening to help his mother, fearing for her life. While the 16-year-old could have handled things better, Baladi said, the case was at most manslaughter stemming from heat of passion rather than murder arising from malice. Heat of passion is when you think your mom is in danger and you shoot someone to stop a fight, Baladi told jurors. But how was Lisa's life in danger when two 20-year-old girls were there, unarmed, demanding to talk to her son? The jury deliberated for 3 hours before the judge asked them to come back the following day after a good night's sleep. They deliberated for another 2.5 hours the following morning. Finally, there was a verdict for Zakwan.
Have an update now on a homicide case in Hampton. A jury found Zaquan Tyler guilty of voluntary manslaughter and underage possession of a firearm.
Due to his age at the time of the incident and the manslaughter charge, Zaquan will only spend 10 years in prison. This was not a happy verdict for Reagan's family. Zaquan gets a full life outside prison. Reagan doesn't get another day. Her dad, Terry, said, "My baby girl, my pork chop. I couldn't save my own daughter. I have been robbed. I have a hole in my soul that can't be filled, and I don't know if I will ever be happy again. I miss hearing her voice. I miss hearing her walking up the stairs. I miss hearing her bracelets colliding while she's walking." After his sentencing, Zaquan finally offered an apology 2 years late. "I wish I could go back and undo what I did. If there's anything I could do to bring Reagan back, I would do it. She was a good person, and like a sister to me. She didn't deserve this, and I will live with it forever." The judge acknowledged Zaquan's remorse, but reminded him that what he did could not be taken back. Reagan's horrific death left a terrible impact on her whole family. Her parents are devastated, and her little brothers can't sleep anymore. One of her little brothers refuses to go outside anymore. He is scared for his life. If something this horrible could happen to Reagan, he thinks, it can happen to anyone. Imagine growing up with this immense hole in your heart and a constant state of fear. With Zaquan behind bars, it was time to remember and honor Reagan once more.
Friends and loved ones of a Hampton woman killed in a recent homicide came together to honor her life.
The community at North Carolina Central University, where Chisley was a student, held a virtual memorial this afternoon.
Reagan was honored through several memorials after her death. Whether it was friends, family, or college pals, everyone spoke highly of her. Others couldn't hold back the tears at how unfair and senseless the situation was.
I don't know what point that is going to feel real.
Reagan, you are my heart, and I will never find a friend like you. I love you, and until we meet again.
Reagan's grandfather said that now, he doesn't take any calls between 9:30 and 10 p.m. You see, Reagan would call him every single night at 9:30 sharp. Not 9:29, not 9:31, not 9:32. Reagan cared deeply for all those around her, and to everyone's constant surprise, she always found the time and energy to let them know they were loved, even amidst her 1,000 responsibilities, ambitions, and plans. The ripple effects of Zaquan's actions will be felt for many years still. Heartbreakingly, Reagan was not the first or last victim of such a senseless moment.
New at 6 o'clock, mass continue to plague the nation, and South Florida, of course, no exception, with 3 incidents being reported this year alone.
As of March 2024, more than 25,000 people lost their lives in GN violence incidents. Of those who died, over 1,000 were children and teenagers.
Makes me frustrated that we, as a society, we haven't done enough to stop these. The bystanding public makes a huge difference in being able to prevent these attacks by noticing the behavioral changes of those around us, whether they be family members or friends or coworkers.
This is the father of Gina Montalto, yet another girl who lost her life in 2023 in a situation painfully similar to Reagan's. And Gina's dad is right. We have a duty to look around us. If we notice someone close to us is getting angry beyond reason or entering a violent argument, we can try and cool things off. And if we feel afraid, it's wise to gain some distance and call authorities. If we can do something about it, we should. However, it's disheartening to see how fast someone can take a life with a fire weapon. In Reagan's case, Zaquan aimed at Reagan's chest just 30 seconds into her argument with his mom. It took her a few minutes to pass away. An angry, impulsive teen with a firearm is a match made in hell. How many people will go through Reagan's chilling story before this changes?
They told me my baby was dead. I could not believe that. I would not believe that. And then I started seeing pictures being posted everywhere of my baby.
Try to get her to elaborate on what clinging meant. She was like, "You're just too clingy," and she just brushed it off. Like, I thought, okay. He was so mannerable. He shook my hand, was yes ma'am, no ma'am, made sure she got in the house before he left, everything. So, I mean, I had no reason to think that he would do anything to her. I thought he loved her.
Not all red flags are visible. When Tierra Hall met Kelton Brescian Fox, he seemed like a quiet, well-intentioned boy. If anything, he was a little clingy, harmless, if a bit annoying, she thought. But Tierra did not know Kelton's dark side. Instead of graduating from high school, Tierra met an end so brutal, it left her family in a state of grief and shock they still can't process. Were there warning signs before Kelton did the unthinkable? Could Tierra have gotten away? And where is Kelton now? This is the full story of Tierra Hall. It was March 27, 2015, and 17-year-old Tierra Hall was excited. It was the last day of school before spring break, and Tierra was going to make the most of it with her family and friends. She was also thinking about prom and graduation, as they were approaching fast, and she was chatting with her besties about her academic plans. Tierra was giddy for the future. She had a lot to look forward to, but Tierra never got a future. That day was her last day in this world. That night, Tierra's frantic mother, Kotea, called and texted her but got no answer. Initially, she thought her daughter was still mad at her after a small argument they'd had that morning. But even if she was, Tierra would still text her mom to let her know she was okay. They were never at odds with each other for more than a few hours. Tierra loved her mother deeply, so Kotea phoned all her friends and relatives. Had they seen her baby anywhere? She never spent the night with other people without letting her know. As no one knew anything about Tierra's whereabouts, Kotea decided to give her daughter one night to come home. In the morning, if she still didn't pick up, Kotea would phone the authorities, but Kotea wouldn't have to. That morning, a couple was walking in the neighborhood surrounding Tierra's school when they noticed a woman seemingly sleeping on the floor of an abandoned house. When they got closer, the couple called 911 in a panic. In the early hours of March 28th, Tierra's mom got a heart-wrenching call.
They told me my baby was dead. I could not believe that. I would not believe that. And then I started seeing pictures being posted everywhere of my baby.
It was true. Tierra was gone. Her lifeless body was found abandoned in a vacant house 2 miles away from her high school in Durham, North Carolina. She had 14 jag marks on her head, face, neck, and chest. Her phone case was next to her body, but the phone was missing. On the building's wall, a fresh piece of graffiti read, "King K the Savage." Who was this person? So cocky that they would leave a signature at the most horrific scene. Who could have taken Tierra's life, and why? She had no enemies. She wasn't involved in gangs or with dealers.
Why? She did nothing to no one.
An investigation would begin, and what the detectives found would shock the entire community.
Nobody's telling me anything. I don't know anything. It's agonizing. I know nothing.
You'd think nothing is worse than losing your child to murder. For Kotea, not knowing what happened made it even worse. The investigation was slow. There were no leads, and no one could identify his grim signature, King K the Savage. For a while, it seemed like Tierra's grisly death would stay a mystery forever. But Kotea knew someone must know something, so she pleaded with everyone watching the horrific news on TV.
Somebody does, and I want them to come forward. Because if it was your family members, you would want the same thing.
At the time of Tierra's death, the homicide rates in Durham were on the rise, 57% more than the year before. Durham was also in the middle of financial and cultural growth, with thriving food and nightclub scenes, a growing arts community, and efforts of community activism and inclusion in the Black community. Tierra and Kotea Wall were not from Durham, but they had moved there from Texas to enjoy its growth and safety. Sadly, they thought Durham would be safer than their hometown. Tierra had always been a happy-go-lucky girl, full of jokes, dreams, and optimism for those around her. She was a good listener, and the kind of person who made everyone feel included and relaxed. Although the first impression could have been that of a goofy girl, Tierra was very career-driven. She wanted to open her business after high school or college, and she wanted to study business to make sure she knew what she was doing down the line. Tierra and her bestie, Amaya, were like twin sisters. They did everything together, and Amaya knew everything about Tierra, dreams, fears, and everyday gossip. Spring break 2015 was going going to be their first week spent entirely together, almost like a friend's honeymoon, if you like. They were getting giddy with plans for that week. Imagine what Amaya felt when she heard her best friend was gone. Not only she was gone, but her life had been taken in the most callous, frenzied way. Whoever had unalived her really wanted her gone. The attack was so brutal that the tip of the knife was broken and lodged into her face. From the scene, the forensic team retrieved the part of the knife as well as a hall pass on a piece of paper from Jordan High School. Thanks to the hall pass, the victim was quickly identified as Tiara Hall, and her loved ones were notified immediately. She was also linked to Jordan High School, so the detectives spoke to its principal, Michael Irving, whose signature was on the hall pass. Michael didn't have any clue who could have committed the heinous act, but he was happy to let the authorities into Tiara's classroom, where they found her desk, computer, and backpack. The authorities thus confirmed Tiara Hall as the victim.
A 17-year-old murdered, her body found near her home and school. Tonight, police and her family are looking for answers.
Michael Irving was devastated. To him, Tiara was nothing but an excellent student and a kind person who deserved none of this. She was not the type to get in trouble, not even the small kind of trouble. Michael was also worried. Whoever had unalived Tiara had done it at or around the school. Now they were on the loose, so none of his students were safe.
Whoever killed Tiara Hall is still on the loose, and police are releasing very few details in this case. However, have indicated Hall may have known her killer.
I just do not understand. Her death means, what does it mean?
Authorities also appeared on the news and promised they were working around the clock to catch Tiara's killer. However, they couldn't reveal any proper information until they had him in handcuffs. If anything leaked, it could have hindered the investigation or caused unrest at the high school.
Investigators have been pretty much almost nonstop going out chasing leads.
Within a few days, they would reach a grim conclusion. Tiara had been unalived by someone who claimed he loved her. On March 29th, 2 days after Tiara's death, authorities began seeking surveillance footage. As they began talking to Tiara's neighbors, the detectives noticed one of them had a camera installed on their building. So they asked permission to check the footage, and the neighbor obliged. At around 12:40 p.m. on March 27th, the camera showed a man walking toward Tiara's home. A few seconds later, Tiara followed, wearing gray sweatpants. At this point, authorities didn't know whether Tiara knew this man and if he was the suspect, but a hunch directed the detectives toward Tiara's high school. So they asked the principal for their surveillance footage from that day. Surprise, surprise, the same man, a teenage boy, was seen walking by Tiara's side on the hallways earlier that day. Another camera caught a disturbing moment. The boy is seen walking towards Tiara and then snatching something from her hand. According to detectives, this was most likely Tiara's phone, a simple way to lure her to a more private place. Tiara would have, of course, gone after the boy to get her phone back. This explains why Tiara is seen following the boy later in the neighborhood, not the other way around. Some 20 minutes later, the same camera caught the boy walking in the opposite direction alone. And a few more minutes later, he is seen again walking down the school's hallways. And when they zoomed in, look what the detectives found on his pants. That's right, it looked like blood. His hands were carefully hidden in his pockets too. But when he exited the restroom, he went in. His hands were out of his pockets, clean. The detectives were quick to show this footage to Michael Irving. If anyone could recognize the boy from the low-res camera, it was Michael. Sure enough, he identified him as 17-year-old Kelton Breshan Fox. Michael remembered him as a quiet boy who didn't have a lot of friends. But Michael saw the best in his students. He didn't think that was suspicious. He just thought Kelton was shy, and perhaps a late bloomer when it came to social skills. The surveillance footage, sadly, painted a much more horrible picture. After going to the restroom, Kelton is seen going to the main office and claiming he felt sick. From there, he phoned his mother and asked her to pick him up. The first thing detectives did was send a forensic team to the high school. After they checked the bathroom, they saw Kelton go in. They found traces of blood. It matched Tiara's. This was the first piece of evidence against Kelton. That day, he'd come into the school to wash his hands. It was enough evidence to obtain a warrant for his arrest and pay him a visit. On Tuesday, March 31st, Kelton Fox was arrested. He was also asked if he knew why. He replied,
"Because one of my friends is gone and they need to find out who did it."
Since Kelton was still a minor, authorities also notified his mom, who appeared in shock and disbelief. She could not believe her son was a killer, or perhaps she didn't want to believe it. Inside the interrogation room, Kelton was even more quiet than his teachers remembered him. Whenever the detectives pressed him for information, he claimed he didn't know anything. When they confronted him with evidence, he said he would never ever do such a thing. Tiara was, after all, his friend. When he was taken into custody, authorities had Kelton's sneakers taken in for a test. Sure enough, they found traces of blood on them too. This was sent to the lab, and just like in the previous case, it was a match to Tiara. Kelton didn't have to talk. He'd already convicted himself. And this was far from the last piece of evidence ensuring a long prison sentence. That day, authorities also obtained a search warrant for his home. When they examined his bedroom, they found this: knives, axes, and various objects bearing the tag Savage. As if that wasn't enough, he also had several notebooks where he'd practiced writing King K the Savage. Honestly, if you want to evade justice after taking an innocent life, why would you spray your tag on the wall of the crime scene? When Kelton's mom saw what the forensic team retrieved from her home, she was shocked. She said she'd seen her son carry a pocket knife with him, but she had no idea he had an entire weapons collection in his room. There was something else his mom didn't know. Kelton was obsessed with Tiara. In his notebooks, the detectives found countless pages detailing his sick obsession, as well as his plans to take her life. It was a sort of, if I can't have her, no one will. He also mused on killing as his greatest passion. One of the things he wrote was, "Killing is my hobby." When the detectives informed Tiara's mom about the person they'd arrested, she was devastated.
He was so mannerable. He shook my hand, was yes ma'am, no ma'am, made sure she got in the house before he left, everything. So, I mean, I had no reason to think that he would do anything to her. I thought he loved her.
Indeed, Kelton and Tiara were a thing before it ended this way. Sometime in the previous school year, Tiara started dating Kelton Fox. The two were the same age, lived close to one another, and seemed to have a lot in common. Or at least there was that intense high school attraction that no one can say no to. But as months passed, Tiara was not so sure this was a long-term thing. For starters, Kelton was clingy. When Tiara told her mom she was breaking things off with Kelton, she asked why, and this was the answer she gave.
Try to get her to elaborate on what clinging meant. She said, "You're just too clingy," and she just brushed it off. Like, I thought, okay.
Kelton was behaving like they were in a committed relationship, even though Tiara wasn't giving signs that she wanted this. He would text her almost all the time, even though she didn't reply to all his texts. He always wanted to know how she was, where she was, and if she would hang out with him. But the more he pushed his way into her life, the more Tiara felt the need for space. For a while, they were in an on and off relationship, or a situationship, call it whatever y'all like, but Kelton wouldn't really understand the meaning of a casual on and off thing. Even when she specifically told him she wouldn't hang out with him a certain day or week, he would still text and call obsessively. When she ignored him, he would stalk her on social media and stare at her when they were at school. What started as annoying soon turned scary. It's not all right to stalk someone. There is no excuse for it. When someone asks you for space, by God, give them space. Kelton had all the makings of a jealous, manipulative, possessive partner. While Tiara wisely kept her distance from him, she never imagined he would react in such a vile way. Around the end of 2014, Tiara broke up with Kelton. She said this time it was completely over. She also asked him not to call or text her or do anything with the hope that he would change her mind. Her mind was made up. Kelton stood there quietly and seemed to take it all in. But by New Year's 2015, he'd decided he was going to take her life. Throughout the first months of 2015, Kelton's diary recorded everything. His growing hatred toward Tiara, his hatred toward the world, his desire to take a life. On April 1st, Kelton saw a judge. He ordered Kelton to be held in jail without bond. Kotea was at his hearing too. She described seeing him as a hit in the gut. She wished she knew more about him before it was too late. Her daughter had told her he was clingy. She'd seen that too. Kelton had come to their home several times and he seemed in love with Tiara. To Kotea, this was a good enough reason to make him clingy. But she never knew he was the possessive type. Tiara had never said anything like that. As a mother, it's easy to imagine how you can jump straight to blaming yourself. Perhaps there were obvious red flags you missed. You should have been the one to know better than your daughter and see the signs earlier. But no one can know everything. And if Tiara didn't think Kelton was evil enough to react so violently, there was nothing she could have said to her mother. She just did not imagine what Kelton was harboring in his mind. Whoever does. On April 5th, a vigil was held for Tiara, releasing purple balloons, one of her favorite colors. She was honored and remembered for who she was when she was alive. Not a victim, but an optimistic girl and a warm soul who made everyone around her smile.
Tonight, friends and loved ones of the Jordan high schooler are coming together to try and make sense of her senseless murder.
People are now making their way out of the church. Just a few minutes ago, there was a balloon release in which the mom tearfully thanked the community for all of their support during this difficult time.
Meanwhile, Kelton found out he couldn't get the death penalty as he was still 17 at the time of the murder. He would also learn that he can get away with the smallest punishment for the worst crime on earth. It took until his 20th birthday for his trial to start. The prosecutors painted a premeditated murder scenario. Surveillance footage showed him taking Tiara's phone and running away, luring her to a remote location where he could do the worst. That shows that he'd at the very least planned to attack her, if not take her life that day. If that wasn't enough, his notebook spoke clearly of Kelton wanting to take a life. He'd also written about how much he hated Tiara for leaving him and how she would pay for doing this to him. It's almost funny how people tend to blame their victims for doing things to them, as if Tiara broke things off to make him suffer, not to escape a situation that made her afraid and unhappy. People like Kelton have a tendency to take things personally and promise disproportionate acts of revenge for the slightest attacks on their egos, on their very fragile egos. Kelton's defense attorney told a tearjerker story about Kelton's childhood. Reportedly, Kelton grew up without a father after he'd abandoned the family. He also said that he witnessed DV at home, but it wasn't clear if this was because of his dad, another man, or his mom. Whichever the case, witnessing DV is deeply traumatic, but doesn't provide an excuse for taking a life. Many children witness horrible things at home. It's unfair and sad, no doubt about it. And of course, seeing violence can affect your trust, attachment style, and emotional range. But not all children who witness this become killers. In fact, very few of them do. In trials, this is a go-to technique used by killers' attorneys. If they look like victims too, the jury is prone to be more forgiving. Then, Kelton's defense team also tried to paint him as suffering from various mental illnesses, PTSD, hallucinations, paranoia, and borderline personality disorder. However, none of these were confirmed by a psychiatrist. Kelton struck a plea deal and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. Much to Koteya's chagrin, the judge sentenced Kelton Fox to 12 to 15 years in prison. He'll be out by the time he's in his mid-30s. How is this fair to Tiara? Why does he get to live and walk out of prison again? Koteya asked. The judge argued that it's difficult to argue that Kelton's was premeditated. To Koteya and so many of Tiara's loved ones, this doesn't make any sense. He wrote about taking her life in his diary for months prior to the incident. Just because it was vague threats and no actual details written down, does it mean he did not actually want to do it? The wheels of justice move slow, and sometimes they work in the killer's favor. The crime scene he left that day even shook first responders. Many of them said they'd seen nothing as graphic before. Imagine seeing the tip of a knife lodged in someone's face. Imagine the force Kelton must have used on Tiara. And usually, when a killer attacks the face, it's as personal and hateful as an attack can be. And yet, Kelton may be out of prison as early as 2027. Koteya's friends spoke about the deep loneliness the mom feels ever since Tiara's death, as her house went from 2 to 1.
When you used to just you and your daughter being in your home, and then now there's nobody there but you and your daughter's dog, that's a lot.
Now, with this release date looming over Koteya's head, she finds it hard to move past her daughter's death. If Kelton gets released in just 3 years, she will relive the nightmare. This hardly feels like proper justice for Tiara.
Brown is accused of abducting Ashanti Billy from JEB Little Creek Fort Story 3 years ago and killing her. Her body was found in Charlotte, North Carolina, weeks after she disappeared.
Breaking news now in the Ashanti Billy case. Her accused killer, Eric Brown, won't stand trial for the crime right now.
A young culinary student and an aspiring chef, Ashanti Billy had her life mapped out and had dreams of reaching great heights. When she asked if she could work at a sandwich shop, her parents let her because the workplace was inside a military area. But despite all precautions, the unthinkable happened. Ashanti went to work one day and never came home. The police continued to search for her and soon uncovered her body far away from where she lived. As they worked on the case, the man who orchestrated her demise came to light, and it was someone no one would have ever suspected. So, who was this man? How did he know Ashanti? And why did he take her life? Let's dive into the tale of Ashanti Billy, a young girl whose life was snuffed out by someone who was supposed to protect the people. 19-year-old Ashanti Billy was a college student at the local culinary school and daughter to Navy veterans Brandy and Meltony Billy. She grew up in a loving, supportive family and had many dreams. Her parents had divorced, but they were doing a great job of co-parenting, and Ashanti never felt that the problems between her parents were interfering with her life or her happiness. At the time of the incident, she was living in Virginia Beach. She had a dream to open her own bakery someday, and attending culinary school was the first step towards that goal. She also worked at a sandwich shop at the Joint Expeditionary Naval Base in Norfolk, Virginia. When she first asked her parents if she could work there, both her parents let her despite the demanding working hours. Food businesses usually open very early in the morning and close late at night. But as the job was in a protected environment, they never worried much about her security. Ashanti believed that this job would be a great way to give back to the military community. Her parents believed the same, but it ended up being a tragedy for their daughter in a way that they'd never expected. Before coming to Maryland, Ashanti had to move a lot with her parents. Germany, New York, Texas, and Alabama were their homes before they settled here. Even though her parents were in the Navy, Ashanti couldn't join there because she had been diagnosed with epilepsy when she was a child. So she chose to follow her passion and become a baker and chef. After joining the culinary school, Ashanti found an apartment and was living with a few flatmates. According to her mother, it was working out well for her. She went along with her roommates. She also had a boyfriend who was in basic training in South Carolina, and her mother said that they had a great relationship. Her father, Meltony Billy, remembered her as a peppy child.
Bubbly, quirky, nerdy, friendly, lovable.
By mid-September of 2017, Ashanti had settled well into her new job and apartment. Her boyfriend would be graduating in a month, and she was preparing to attend the ceremony. One morning, she left her apartment complex at 4 a.m. She had to clean the store as they were expecting a health inspection at their shop. Roughly at 5 in the morning, Ashanti drove through the naval base gate to arrive at her work. Security footage had proof of her entering the area, but she never showed up at her workplace. She was one of the most reliable employees in the shop and never missed any of her duties. When 3 hours passed by and she didn't show up, a co-worker called her on her cell phone to see what was taking her so long. And to her surprise, a man picked up.
Someone else answered. It was a man, and he told me that he found her phone in the dumpster, but I thought she just probably misplaced the lost.
He told her that the phone looked in good condition, so he picked it up, hoping that the owner would call to collect it. A second co-worker called Ashanti's number and was told the same thing. She didn't pay much attention and went back to work. But when Ashanti didn't show up at her class, that's when her friends began to speculate that something terribly wrong had happened to her. Ashanti's parents and the police were soon notified. Her parents also tried reaching her, but when they didn't get an update from her, her mother Brandy posted a video on Facebook asking everyone to help with any information they might have on Ashanti and her whereabouts. She also asked for their prayers.
I'm begging of everybody, please pray for my baby.
Police kept searching for the young girl, but they couldn't find a lead. Authorities issued statements and asked the locals to help with the search.
We're here today to talk about a missing person, Ashanti Billy, who is a new member of our community within the last month, moved down here and has gone missing under what we would say is suspicious activity.
The police traced her phone and found it in the dumpster that was mentioned by the strange man who had picked up her call. The dumpster was 4 miles away from the naval base. No one knew how her phone had reached a location so far away. 5 days later, police finally found Ashanti's vehicle, a cream-colored 2004 Mini Cooper 5 miles away from their location, parked on a cul-de-sac on the 9500 block of Lakeshore Drive in the Ocean View section of Norfolk. But it was abandoned, with no sign of the girl anywhere. The car was parked in front of a house, and the owner mentioned that the car had been there for at least a few days. He didn't have a clue that the police were looking for it, else he would have notified them. The car had its doors unlocked and windows slightly rolled down. The keys were on the passenger seat, and the police found clothing items at the back of the car, including Ashanti's work shirt. They also found pants and a pair of shoes, which seemed to have been removed from her body. The clothes had traces of dirt in them. Soon, the FBI got involved and started looking for her. They announced a $10,000 reward for any tips related to her disappearance. Her workplace also announced a $10,000 reward, making the total $20,000. People were also allowed to sign up as volunteers for her search party. Authorities soon retrieved the security footage where Ashanti's vehicle was seen entering and then leaving the naval base. The gate Ashanti used for arriving at work was reportedly blocked by a road accident, so she left through the same gate to drive around and enter the base through another gate, and that's what the cameras picked up. The person who appeared in the driver's seat in the video seemed to be wearing dark, colored clothes, which matched the description of Ashanti was likely wearing on that day. So it was unlikely that someone else was driving her car. One also needed to produce an ID card to enter the naval base, so it couldn't have been anyone else but her. This is where the story took an interesting turn. Cameras picked up Ashanti's car driving around her sandwich shop, but a camera later picked up her leaving the base once again, this time through the second gate. The face of the driver was still unrecognizable. However, this time the driver was wearing light-colored clothes. Ashanti, or the person driving her car, reportedly left the area at 5:30 a.m. or 5:32 a.m., but the other details were unclear.
But because of the angle of the camera, they was not able to see whether was it her driving, was it an additional occupant in the car, was she being forced to leave?
When they checked with the authorities of the base, they were unable to help. At one point, her parents wondered if the military was being truthful and not giving them the actual details of the incident, but there was no way for them to prove anything.
Not even a simple call. It made me start saying, is there something to hide? Do y'all know something?
And then the police were finally able to crack the case. On September 29th, 300 miles away from the scene, at the back of a church in Charlotte, North Carolina, they found the body of a young girl that had started to decompose. The body didn't have any clothes on her and was in a horrible state. Her arms were raised and were bound inside a dark-colored sweatshirt. She was lying on top of a plastic sheet. The police also found plastic gloves near her body. Upon primary inspection, they didn't find any knife wounds or gun wounds on her. It was difficult to identify how the woman had passed away. When they heard about the body, Ashanti's family members were in disbelief and had faith that it wasn't their beloved child.
As the family awaits further updates, we ask that you continue to keep us in prayer and pray that this is not Ashanti Billy.
But the investigators were able to identify the young woman. The body was of Ashanti. Someone had taken her life, and quite brutally so. Her parents were absolutely devastated as they issued a press release.
Our desire and our prayers were answered. She's home with God. And we're okay with that.
Now there was only one thing to do: find out who did this to her. Authorities employed a talented team of investigators to solve the case as soon as possible.
There is a team of dedicated investigators who are determined to find out what happened in this case.
Ashanti's family held a funeral for her. Her near and dear ones attended, remembered her fondly, and prayed for her departed soul. Her father gave a heartfelt speech as he remembered his daughter, and his words brought tears to everyone's eyes.
Don't be sorry for my loss. Be grateful for God's gain.
As the investigation continued, Ashanti's friends and family raised multiple questions. Her mother, Brandy, questioned the safety of the area.
Where's the security at? There have been failures the whole way down.
After 4 weeks of searching, the police finally had a lead. Ashanti's co-workers came out with a name, a person who had been harassing her for quite some time. They called him a creep and said that he made Ashanti very uncomfortable. His name was Eric Brian Brown, and he was 45 years old, and the shocking part of it, he was a retired Navy veteran. The co-workers eventually deduced that he probably worked at the laundromat next to their shop, but he didn't. However, he was allowed inside the base, supposedly, because he had served in the military for 21 years. He wasn't working there, but as he wasn't doing anything unlawful, no one was bothered about his presence at the base. Ashanti's co-workers said that sometimes they gave him rides too.
I never took him home, but I took him to stores across the street because that's what he wanted to do.
After the complaints, the police began investigating Brown's movements to understand how he landed himself in this case. It didn't take them long to understand that he was homeless and slept in various buildings on the naval base. He worked as a day laborer to sustain himself. He also helped build the sandwich shop where Ashanti worked. Shockingly, when police checked his whereabouts, they found that Brown was already in police custody for trespassing in the area and was arrested on the day after Ashanti's body was found. When writing his details, he wrote Charlotte, North Carolina as his home address and said that he frequented between the two places. Police had found Ashanti's body in Charlotte, and this raised their suspicions further. After his arrest for trespassing, he was still being held at the prison as no one came to free him. The police marked him as the prime suspect for the case and brought him for interrogation for the first time on October 10, 2017. When police asked him if he had heard anything about the recent incident at the base, at first he refused, and then he claimed that he'd heard something about a missing girl, but he refused that he knew anything about Ashanti. His behavior was strange, and his claims were pretty incoherent, so the police kept him on their radar. As the police asked around, many witnesses came forward with statements against Brown. A few of Ashanti's co-workers claimed that Brown repeatedly flirted with Ashanti despite their age gap. Many others said that they felt uncomfortable with Brown's advances. He even made crude remarks about the black community. He said that he hated African American women because they were gold diggers. The police also spoke to a few of the inmates who were in prison with Brown. One of them claimed that Brown told him, "There ain't nothing like the first taste of blood. Sometimes it makes you do things that are inexplicable." Whatever he meant with those words, they were indeed disturbing. Police soon got their hands on more evidence. New security footage showed Ashanti's car at an intersection in Norfolk. It had a somewhat clearer appearance of the driver, who was about 5'9" and was wearing light-colored clothing. He pulled over at the intersection, got out of the car, and tossed something into the construction dumpster. It was Ashanti's phone, which would later be found by construction workers at the site. Ashanti was only 4'11", and it was obvious to the police that she wasn't driving that car. Police made the footage public and asked for help from anyone who could identify the driver. On October 31, 2017, the FBI received a call from a man who said that he knew who the person was in the car. He claimed it was Brown and said that he had worked with this man as a day laborer, so this man was certain that he wasn't making a mistake. The way the person walked and moved in the footage had to be Brown. Investigators called Brown again, and this time his narrative changed. When asked to give recollections of his whereabouts on the day of the incident, he simply claimed that he couldn't remember and said something about walking around from one gate to another. The police got a warrant to search his phone. Tracing it told them that he had used the phone on all days in September, except for the day Ashanti went missing. They also checked the surveillance footage to see if he was telling the truth about walking from gate to gate, but they found nothing. He was also not seen leaving the base during this period. However, on September 19th, he was caught magically returning to the base from the outside. If he hadn't left the base, how was he returning? And if he had left the base, why didn't the cameras pick him up? That's because he drove out of the base in Ashanti's car. His phone search history also showed disturbing results. He'd searched terms like police looking for man, missing woman, and Norfolk police looking for man in connection with homicide. He also checked Norfolk news websites repeatedly, and the dates were around 8 days before Ashanti's body was found. Investigators then conducted a DNA test. They found an unidentified male DNA sample on 2 clothing items found in Ashanti's car, and they matched perfectly with Brown. On November 9th, 2017, Brown was arrested and charged with homicide. He would face a maximum penalty of life in prison if convicted. Ashanti's father was very upset after learning the identity of the man who had taken his daughter's life. Military men are supposed to protect the country, not cause rackets in it, and this man had done exactly that.
Your job is to protect this country, to protect every life, and you took the freedom of my child. You took her life. And it's unacceptable.
As the investigators dug deeper into the case, another question came up. Why the church? Why didn't Brown dump the body elsewhere? Further probing revealed that the church was where Brown went to Vacation Bible School as a child. It was also close to his family home. Dr. Michael McLean, pastor at the East Stonewall AME Zion Church, also expressed his disbelief over Brown's choice of place to hide the body. He was not from Charlotte, which confused everyone initially.
Didn't understand how she ended up here on this property here in Charlotte, being from Virginia.
what the connection was all about, and now the pieces are put together pretty much.
But what did Brown have to say about the incident? Well, he made a weak plea and claimed that he had blacked out for a few days and couldn't remember anything from those days. In fact, he couldn't even remember if he had done anything to Ashanti. Ashanti's parents were furious when they heard his statement.
You know exactly what you were doing. You preyed upon an innocent young lady who happened to be my child. And that was the biggest mistake that you made.
Brown was charged with abduction and homicide, but according to the U.S. Attorney's Office, he could also get charges of assault. When the officers found Ashanti's body, her underwear was found by her head. The rest of her clothes were found inside her car. Ashanti's father wasn't satisfied with those charges and wanted Brown to pay for what he did to his daughter.
I'm not going to accept just the murder charge or the kidnapping, because you did more than just murder and kidnap. You did a lot.
Ashanti's mother, Brandy, was upset because they thought they were sending their child to work in a secure environment. She still blamed the lack of security for the incident.
This was allowed to occur on a naval base. It can happen anywhere.
They stressed that security measures should be strengthened to ensure everyone's safety, and not just inside the base. The case garnered media attention. The system already had the Amber and Silver Alert, but what about endangered adults who went missing? For them, authorities petitioned for a new alert, which was eventually named Ashanti Alert in honor of the late Ashanti.
Her parents fought for that to change, and Virginia lawmakers created an Ashanti Alert. It allows for widespread public notification if an adult between 18 and 64 disappears and is believed to be in danger.
This alert is believed to fill the gap between the age brackets for the Amber and Silver Alert and hopes to save more lives. Ashanti's parents would never be able to bring Ashanti back, but they hoped that this alert would help those endangered adults who couldn't get help anywhere in such situations. It goes beyond saying that Ashanti would be very proud of her parents if she was alive. In 2017, after a thorough examination, the judge ruled that Brown wasn't fit to stand trial, and the news devastated Ashanti's parents. After 18 months of treatment, in December 2019, the judge ruled that Brown must not be medicated forcibly until the court could decide whether he should be treated for fitness for a trial.
Brown has been in a federal facility undergoing treatment for schizophrenia. The judge said Brown's competency cannot be restored right now, so the trial is postponed indefinitely.
The authorities in charge were giving him antipsychotics and wanted to add one more medicine, but it required orders from the court because Brown refused to take those medicines. Since Brown wasn't in a state to understand it, it wouldn't be lawful and fair if he stood the trial. But this meant that justice for Ashanti would be pushed further down. Her mother mentioned that they were looking at other options and legislation that they could push. This development didn't, however, mean that the case was over.
If Brown's mental status is ever restored, he will face the charges.
Authorities were doing everything in their power to restore his status, but it was still an uncertain procedure.
They are working to get him committed to a government facility at this time.
As of 2024, Ashanti's family is still waiting to receive justice for their daughter. So, what did you think of this case? Do you think Ashanti should have informed someone when Brown was continuously flirting with her and making inappropriate advances? Do you think talking to her parents would have saved her life? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching the video. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel.